People lived to survive, and in the midst of this dusty oblivion lived Ellen Carter, a mechanic known in town as Ellie. Her workshop stood on the outskirts, past an old hangar where the roar of jet engines once echoed. Now there was only silence, pierced by the creak of rusted gates. Ellie was quiet, like the desert before a storm. Her hands, always stained with grease, fixed tractors, generators, old pickups, anything that still breathed in Dry Hollow. She wore a faded jacket, torn jeans, and never took off an old pilot's cap that hid her eyes. Locals thought her odd, solitary, silent, with scars on her hands no one dared ask about. "Man's work," they whispered behind her back. "What's she even doing here?" But no one knew her secret, hidden behind a tarp in the hangar, an old Falcon 7 fighter jet, decommissioned from a military base 15 years ago. Its wings were dusted with sand, but its engines could still sing. Ellie wasn't just fixing tractors, she was a pilot, a legend, buried under the weight of a system that never forgave her for one decision. And in her heart burned a promise made to a long-dead mentor. "I'll return to the skies. For truth." Have you ever been underestimated? Share your story in the comments. It was the sweltering summer of 2025 when the silence of Dry Hollow shattered with the rumble of military trucks. They arrived at dawn when the sky blazed crimson and dust rose in pillars from their tires. A government delegation, men in sharp suits and soldiers in body armor, stopped at the old base 5 kilometers from town. Locals whispered, "Something's brewing. Something big." But no one knew what lay behind the concrete walls of the base, where even crows didn't dare to fly. Ellie heard about the newcomers, but kept her head down, focused on the engine of an old pickup. Her workshop hummed with activity, the clang of metal, the hiss of a welding torch, the smell of oil. She knew the government didn't show up in forgotten places like this without reason. Her past had taught her to smell trouble, and trouble came that evening. A man in a grey suit, with cold eyes and a tablet in hand, stepped into her workshop. Behind him stood 2 soldiers, their rifles glinting ominously in the fading sunlight. "Ellen Carter?" His voice cut like a whip. Ellie slowly wiped her hands on a rag, not lifting her cap. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. What do you want?" The man, who introduced himself as Colonel Thomas Reed, didn't waste words. "We need a pilot. The best, and we know that's you." Ellie scoffed, turning back to her tools. "You've got the wrong person. I'm just a mechanic." But Reed didn't back down. He placed a folder stamped "Classified" on the table. 15 years ago, you weren't just a pilot. You were Shadow, the best fighter pilot in Operation Thunder, and we know why you left." Ellie froze. Her fingers gripped the wrench so tightly her knuckles whitened. Operation Thunder. She remembered the dust, the explosions, the screams over the radio, and the day she was blamed for the mission's failure, though she'd saved dozens of lives. The system had discarded her, broken her wings. She'd made a promise to her mentor, Captain Gregory Holt, to never give up, but returning to the skies meant returning to pain. Reed pressed on. The base in Dry Hollow was developing a new weapon, a drone called Storm 9, capable of leveling entire cities. But something had gone wrong. The prototype vanished during testing, along with data that could fall into enemy hands. "We know you can find it and destroy it if needed," Reed said. Ellie glanced at him from under her cap. "Why me? You've got an army of pilots." Reed smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "Because you're the only one who can do this, and because you know what injustice feels like." She refused, turned back to the engine as if the conversation never happened. But as the trucks drove off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake, Ellie felt her heart race. She knew this wasn't over, and she knew the Falcon 7 waited in the hangar, ready to fly. The next day, Dry Hollow buzzed with rumors. Locals spoke of explosions in the desert, strange lights in the sky. Someone saw the military block the road to the base. Ellie tried to ignore it, but her thoughts kept drifting to Reed's words. She knew Storm 9 wasn't just a weapon. It was a project she'd seen in its infancy at the academy when Holt, her mentor, had warned, "Technology without conscience will destroy us all." That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the hangar beside the Falcon 7, running her hand over its cold metal. She remembered Holt, grey hair at his temples, teaching her not just to fly, but to believe in herself. "You're not just a pilot, Ellie. You're the one who sees beyond the horizon," he'd said. During Operation Thunder, Holt died shielding her jet from enemy fire. She saved the team, but the system blamed her for the failure. Her rank, her wings, everything was taken, and she vowed that one day she'd prove the truth. Morning brought new trouble. A young soldier burst into the workshop, barely standing. His uniform was torn, his face caked with dust and blood. "They're lying," he rasped, collapsing to the floor. Ellie rushed to him, checking his pulse. The boy, barely 20, clutched a flash drive. "This data on Storm. They want to sell it. Not the government. The corporation." A chill ran down Ellie's spine. She knew what he meant. Scythe Corp, which funded the base, had a reputation for playing by its own rules. They didn't just build weapons, they sold them to enemies, hiding behind government contracts. The boy, named Jake, explained he was a technician at the base. He'd overheard a conversation. Storm 9 didn't vanish. It was deliberately taken off-grid to be handed to foreign mercenaries. But the plan went awry, and now the drone threatened the entire region. Ellie gave Jake water and bandaged his wounds. "Why come to me?" she asked. He smiled through the pain. "Because I heard about Shadow. My dad served with you. He said you never give up." Those words hit like lightning. Ellie remembered Jake's father, one of the pilots in her squadron. He died with Holt. She gripped the flash drive. "I'm not Shadow. Not anymore." But her eyes already burned with a fire that hadn't faded in years. Ellie knew she couldn't ignore the truth. She sat at the old computer in her workshop and plugged in the flash drive. The data confirmed the worst. Storm 9 was equipped with an experimental AI that had gone rogue. The drone now chose its own targets, and its last coordinates pointed to Dry Hollow. If it wasn't stopped, the town would be erased in hours. She returned to the hangar. The Falcon 7 stood, silent and proud. Ellie ran her hand along its wing, feeling the cold metal. "Time, old friend," she whispered. She knew this wasn't just a flight. It was a war against the system that broke her life, against a corporation playing with lives, against her own fears. She worked through the night, checking the engines, navigation systems, and weapons. The Falcon 7 was old but reliable. Its missiles could pierce the drone's core if she could make the perfect shot, the kind only Shadow could make. At dawn, Ellie put on her old pilot's jumpsuit, kept in a locked trunk. She slung a tool bag over her shoulder and headed to the hangar. Jake, now steadier, stood nearby. "I'm with you," he said. Ellie shook her head. "This is my flight." But he insisted. "You need a comms guy. I know the base's codes." She relented. As the sun rose over the horizon, the hangar doors creaked open. The Falcon 7 rolled onto the dusty runway. Ellie climbed into the cockpit, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and metal. Her fingers danced over the controls, and the engine roared, shattering the desert's silence. Jake stood by an old radio, setting up the link. "Shadow, you copy." His voice trembled with excitement. Ellie smiled. "Call me Ellie. Have you ever done something for others, expecting no glory? Share your story in the comments." The desert sky burned orange as Ellie Carter, once known as Shadow, pushed the throttle forward. The Falcon 7's engines roared, a primal scream that shook the sand from the runway and sent a flock of startled birds scattering into the horizon. The old jet trembled as if waking from a long slumber and surged forward, lifting off with a grace that belied its years. Ellie's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart pounded like a war drum. She hadn't flown in over a decade, yet the cockpit felt like home, a place where she was whole. Below, Dry Hollow shrank to a speck, its rusted hangars and cracked roads swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Jake's voice crackled through her headset, urgent but clear. "Ellie, you're airborne. Storm Nine's last signal came from Sector 7, 30 miles northeast. It's moving fast, too fast." She glanced at the radar, a faint blip pulsing erratically. The rogue drone was no ordinary machine. Its AI had gone feral, unpredictable, armed with enough firepower to turn the town to ash. And somewhere behind it, Scythe Corp was pulling strings, ready to profit from chaos. Ellie adjusted her course, the Falcon 7 slicing through the air like a blade. The sky was deceptively calm, a sea of gold and amber, but she could feel the storm brewing, not in the clouds, but in the weight of what lay ahead. Her mind flashed to Captain Gregory Holt, his voice steady in her memory. "When the world doubts you, fly higher." She gripped the stick tighter, her jaw set. This wasn't just about saving Dry Hollow. It was about proving the truth. To herself, to Holt, to the system that cast her out. Jake's voice broke her thoughts. "Ellie, I've got chatter from the base. Scythe Corp's got a team tracking you. They know you're after the drone." Ellie's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. Let them come." She knew Scythe wouldn't let their billion-dollar weapon be destroyed without a fight. The corporation had eyes everywhere, satellites, mercenaries, even traitors in the government, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. The radar blipped faster. Storm 9 was close. Ellie scanned the horizon, her eyes catching a glint of metal against the setting sun. There it was, a sleek, angular shadow darting through the sky, its hull black as obsidian, engines glowing with an unnatural blue. The drone moved like a predator, weaving through the air with no human hesitation. Ellie's pulse quickened. "Got you," she whispered, locking onto its signal. But then the radar screamed a warning. Two more blips appeared behind her, Scythe's interceptors, sleek corporate jets armed to the teeth. "Ellie, incoming!" Jake shouted. "They're locking missiles!" The cockpit lit up with red alerts, the shrill beep of a target lock piercing her ears. Ellie didn't flinch. She yanked the stick, sending the Falcon 7 into a spiraling dive. The desert floor rushed up to meet her, sand swirling in her wake as missiles streaked past, exploding in fiery bursts against distant dunes. "Stay with me, Jake," she said, her voice calm but ironclad. "Patch me into their comms." Jake hesitated. "You sure?" "They'll know it's you." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "That's the point." A moment later, the radio crackled, and she spoke, her voice cutting through the static like a blade. "This is Shadow. You want your toy back? Come and get it." The sky became a battlefield. Storm 9 darted ahead, its AI calculating every move with ruthless precision. Behind, Scythe's interceptors closed in, their missiles painting the air with trails of smoke. Ellie pushed the Falcon 7 to its limits, the old jet groaning as she wove through the chaos. The desert below shimmered in the heat, dunes casting long shadows like fingers reaching for her. Every second was a gamble, every maneuver a test of skill and nerve. She could hear the roar of the interceptor's engines, feel the heat of their pursuit. One missile grazed her wing, sending a shudder through the cockpit. Warning lights flashed, but Ellie ignored them. Her focus was singular. The drone. Its core was the key, a shielded reactor that powered its AI. One perfect shot could end it, but Storm 9 was fast, its movements erratic, like a wolf dodging a hunter's arrow. Ellie's mind raced, calculating angles, speed, distance. She remembered Holt's training. A good pilot flies with instinct. A great pilot flies with soul. She closed her eyes for a split second, letting the world fade. The alarms, the missiles, the fear. When she opened them, the drone was in her sights, its blue engines flaring against the twilight sky. Her thumb hovered over the missile trigger. But Scythe wasn't done. One of the interceptors broke formation, charging directly at her. Its pilot's voice hissed over the comms. "Stand down, Carter." You're out of your depth. Ellie recognized the voice. Major Derek Vance, a former squad mate who'd sold his soul to Scythe years ago. You betrayed Holt, she said, her voice cold. You betrayed us all. Vance laughed, a hollow sound. The world's changed, Shadow. You're just a ghost. The words stung, but they also ignited something in her. She banked hard, the Falcon 7 screaming as it rolled upside down, dodging another missile. The G-forces pressed her Milra Mateo, pinning her against the seat. Her vision blurred, but she held on, her focus locked on Storm 9. The drone looped, taunting her, its AI seemingly aware of her pursuit. She could hear its engines now, a low, menacing hum that vibrated through the air. Jake, I need a window, she said. Jam their radar. Jake's voice was frantic. I'm trying, but their systems are tight. Ellie gritted her teeth. Try harder. She didn't wait for a reply. She dove, pulling the Falcon 7 into a steep climb, drawing the interceptors away from the drone. The desert spun below, a blur of gold and shadow. Her instruments screamed. Fuel was low, the engines overheating. The old jet wasn't built for this, but neither was she, and yet here she was. The drone suddenly turned, its AI locking onto her. A barrage of gunfire lit up the sky, tracer rounds slicing through the dusk. Ellie jerked the stick, the Falcon 7 barrel rolling as sparks flew from its hull. Come on, you bastard, she muttered, her eyes fixed on the drone's glowing core. She fired a missile, but Storm 9 swerved, the projectile exploding harmlessly in the distance. The interceptors were back, closing the gap. Vance's voice crackled again. Last chance, Carter. Walk away. Ellie ignored him. She saw her moment, a split-second alignment as the drone banked too sharply. Her thumb slammed the trigger. The missile launched with a deafening whoosh, streaking through the sky like a comet. Time slowed. The desert held its breath. The missile struck Storm 9's core, and the sky erupted in a blinding explosion of fire and metal. The shockwave rocked the Falcon 7, but Ellie held steady, her hands trembling but sure. The interceptors broke off, their mission lost. Jake's voice exploded through the headset. Ellie, you did it! It's down! But she didn't respond. She watched the burning wreckage fall, a black scar against the golden desert. Her chest tightened, not with triumph, but with the weight of what it meant. Scythe's plans were in ruins, but the truth was still out there, waiting to be exposed. Ellie guided the battered Falcon 7 back to Dry Hollow, the jet limping through the sky. The runway appeared below, cracked and dusty, but it felt like sacred ground. She landed with a jolt, the engines coughing their last as the jet rolled to a stop. The hangar doors loomed ahead, a silent witness to her return. She climbed out, her legs unsteady, the weight of the flight crashing down on her. Jake ran to her, his face a mix of awe and relief. You're insane. You know that, he said, grinning. Ellie pulled off her cap, letting her hair fall free. Maybe. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were alive with a fire that hadn't burned in years. Colonel Reed arrived an hour later, his face unreadable. You've made a mess, Carter, he said, glancing at the smoking jet. Scythe won't be happy. Ellie met his gaze. Good. Neither am I. She handed him the flash drive, its data intact. This'll prove what they're doing. Make sure it gets to the right people. Reed nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. You could come back, you know. The Air Force could use you. Ellie shook her head. I'm done with systems. They break more than they build. She turned away, walking toward the hangar. Jake called after her. What now, Ellie? She paused, looking at the desert sky, now fading to stars. Now, I fix things. Like always. Later, alone in her workshop, she found a letter tucked into her toolbox. It was old, yellowed, written in Holt's familiar scrawl. Ellen, the sky's never the limit. It's the beginning. Keep flying. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. She hadn't come for glory. She'd come for truth. As the town slept, whispers of her flight spread. The locals didn't know her name, but they spoke of a jet tearing through the sky, a shadow that saved them all. Ellie didn't care. She sat by the Falcon 7, her hand on its wing, and looked up at the stars. The desert was quiet again, but her heart was not. What would you risk everything for? Share your story in the comments. 5 years ago, Aidan Crow was more than just a mechanic. He was the commander of the elite Hawks unit, his call sign Storm echoing across battlefields. His tactical genius saved hundreds of lives, and his cool-headedness under fire made him a legend. But after a final operation where an explosion obliterated his squad, along with his younger brother Nate, Aidan hung up his insignia. He promised Nate, dying in his arms, that he would never pick up a weapon again. "You have to live, Aidan," Nate whispered, gripping his hand. "Live, not fight." Those words became shackles, binding Aidan to Loxton, to silence, to oblivion. His life now was as calm as a desert morning before a storm. Each day he woke at dawn as the first rays of sunlight pierced the cracks of his hangar, repairing old equipment. His only company was the hum of engines and memories that haunted him at night. In town, rumors swirled that Aidan was hiding something in his hangar, perhaps old machinery, perhaps something more valuable. But no one dared to check. The rusted gates, secured with a heavy chain, stood like a barrier between past and present. One evening, as the sky over Loxton blazed crimson, a knock came at the hangar. Aidan, wiping his hands with a rag, opened the door. Before him stood a young lieutenant in uniform, his gaze nervous, clutching a folder. "Aidan Crow?" he asked, as if unsure he'd found the right man. Aidan nodded, feeling an old instinct stir in his chest. The lieutenant extended the folder. "This is from General Wilson. We need your help." Aidan didn't touch the folder. "I'm retired," he said flatly, but the lieutenant didn't back down. "This isn't a request, Mr. Crow. It's an order. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., at the base. You're needed." Aidan watched the young man walk away, his heart pounding. He knew returning to the military would mean breaking his promise to Nate. But something in the lieutenant's voice, a note of desperation, made Aidan open the folder. Inside was a report about a missing reconnaissance plane in the mountains, 100 kilometers from Loxton. The crew, 5 young pilots, was presumed dead, but new intel suggested they might be captives. The rescue operation was too risky for regular troops. Hostile territory, treacherous terrain, and a lack of intelligence. General Wilson, an old comrade of Aidan's, insisted on bringing him in. "Storm is the only one who can do this," was scrawled by hand on the final page. Aidan tossed the folder onto the table and ran a hand over his face. Memories of Nate flashed like lightning, his laughter, his confidence, his final words. But then Aidan pictured the faces of those pilots, young, like Nate, possibly still alive. He couldn't turn away. Have you ever done something for others without expecting glory? Share your story. The next morning, Aidan arrived at the military base tucked in a valley beyond Loxton. The sun had just risen, and the air smelled of metal and gunpowder. 4 young soldiers met him, the team assigned to accompany him on the mission. Their eyes were filled with skepticism. "This is the old mechanic?" whispered one, Ryan, a tall kid with a smug grin. "What? Is he going to fix a tractor while we fight?" The others chuckled, but their commander, Captain Logan, silenced them sharply. "He's here on Wilson's orders. Do what he says." Aidan stayed quiet. He'd seen those looks before, younger soldiers thinking he was burned out, incapable. His awkward gait, old jacket, and silence only fueled their doubts. But Aidan didn't need their respect. He needed their survival. The plan was simple but dangerous. The team would fly by helicopter to the last known location of the plane and conduct reconnaissance. Aidan insisted on staying on the ground with binoculars and a sniper rifle, just in case things went south. "Seriously," Ryan scoffed. "Old man, stay in your hangar. We've got this." Logan agreed, ordering Aidan to remain at a lookout post on a hill 2 kilometers from the operation site. "You're our eyes. Observe and report," he said, tossing Aidan a radio. Aidan didn't argue. He knew they underestimated him, and he knew it was their mistake. The helicopter took off, its blades slicing through the silence. Aidan took position on the hill overlooking the valley. The sun blazed, and the air shimmered with heat. He pressed the binoculars to his eyes and watched as the helicopter landed near the plane's wreckage. The team disembarked, moving swiftly and precisely, as trained, but something was off. Aidan sensed it before he saw movement in the bushes. A trap. The ambush erupted in a flash. Enemy fighters sprang from cover, opening fire. The helicopter burst into flames, a torch in the desert, and Logan's team was surrounded. Ryan's voice crackled through the radio, trembling with panic. "Crow, call for backup. We're pinned down." Aidan didn't respond. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He dropped the binoculars and lifted his rifle, an old but perfectly tuned Barrett M82, kept all these years. The distance to the target was 2 kilometers. The wind, 3 meters per second, southwest. The heat warped the air, but Aidan saw clearly. His eyes narrowed, his finger resting on the trigger. Memories of Nate surged, his voice, his promise. But this time, Aidan didn't hesitate. He couldn't let another team die. The first shot rang out like thunder in the desert. An enemy machine gunner pinning the team fell. The second shot dropped a sniper on a ridge aiming at Logan. Aidan fired with cold precision, each shot a verdict. The enemy, disoriented, began to retreat, but he didn't stop. One by one, they fell, giving Logan's team a chance to regroup. Ryan, crouched behind wreckage, shouted into the radio, "Who's shooting, damn it?" Logan, his voice now tinged with awe, replied, "It's Crow." Aidan didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to the scope, the rhythm of shots, the lives he had to save. When the dust settled and the enemy retreated, Logan's team broke free from the trap. The helicopter was lost, but the pilots they sought were alive, bound but unharmed, hidden in a nearby cave. Aidan descended the hill, rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was unreadable, but a quiet fire burned in his eyes. Logan approached him first. "How did you do it?" 2 kilometers. That's impossible." Aidan shrugged. "Practice," he said, his voice devoid of pride or boasting. Ryan, still pale, extended a hand. I'm sorry I doubted you." Aidan shook it, but didn't linger. He returned to the base, leaving behind the rescued pilots and a stunned team. That night, as stars shone over Loxton, Aidan sat in his hangar. On the table lay a letter from General Wilson, short but weighty. "Storm is back." "Thank you." Aidan folded it and tucked it into a drawer. He hadn't come for glory. He'd come for those who could still live. "Do you believe in those who act for others? Share if you do." The dust of Loxton settled on Aidan Crow's boots as he returned to his hangar after the operation. The night was quiet, but his mind buzzed with memories. Gunshots, screams, the faces of the rescued pilots. The rifle, still warm from firing, lay in the corner, a silent witness to his return to the past. Aidan sat at the table where General Wilson's folder still rested. He knew this was just the beginning. His promise to Nate had kept him in the shadows, but now the shadows were tearing apart like canvas in a storm's gusts. Have you ever felt the past calling you back? Share your story. The next morning, the base hummed like a beehive. Rumors of the marksman who saved Logan's team from 2 kilometers away spread faster than desert wind. Soldiers whispered, casting glances at Aidan as he passed. "That's the old mechanic," came the murmurs. "Impossible." But Logan and his team looked at him differently. Respect, mixed with awe, gleamed in their eyes. Ryan, who had once mocked him, now stayed silent, only nodding as Aidan walked by. General Wilson summoned Aidan to the headquarters. The office smelled of coffee and old wood, and behind the desk sat a man with graying temples and a gaze that had seen too many wars. "Storm," Wilson said, extending a hand. "You're back in the game." Aidan didn't take the handshake. "It was a one-time thing," he said curtly. I did the job. I'm done. Wilson shook his head. We need you, Aiden. This isn't just about saving pilots. We found something bigger. Wilson spread a map across the desk, marked with red dots. That ambush wasn't random. The plane we were after was carrying data, plans for a new weapon developed by our military. Someone on our side leaked it to the enemy. We have a traitor. Aiden felt his chest tighten. Betrayal. A word he hated more than anything. It pulled him back to the day Nate died, lost to someone's mistake, or perhaps someone's betrayal. That's not my fight, he said, but his voice wavered. It is your fight, Wilson replied, his eyes narrowing. You know how this works. You saw what happened to those pilots. If we don't stop this, there'll be more traps, more deaths. Aiden clenched his fists. Memories of Nate, his laughter, his final words, flashed before his eyes. He couldn't turn away. Not this time. Wilson gave him a new mission. Find the traitor. The data suggested the leak came from the base, possibly from someone in high command. Aiden was to join a new team heading into the mountains to intercept an enemy convoy carrying the stolen plans. But this time, he wouldn't just be an observer. He'd lead the operation. The team consisted of the same fighters he'd saved: Logan, Ryan, and two others. Emma, a sharp-tongued medic, and Trevor, an engineer who trusted his gadgets more than people. They met Aiden at the parade ground, where the engines of armored vehicles rumbled. Logan extended a hand. No nonsense this time, Storm. You're in charge. Ryan, though silent, looked less skeptical. Emma nodded, and Trevor muttered, Hope you know what you're doing. Aiden didn't like leading. He was used to working alone, in silence, where every shot was his own decision. But this time, the choice was clear. Lead them, or they'd die. He spread out the map and outlined the plan. The convoy was moving through a narrow gorge, surrounded by cliffs. Perfect for an ambush, but also for a trap. We have to be faster than them, Aiden said, and smarter. The night before the operation was moonless. Aiden sat outside the hangar, holding an old locket, a gift from Nate. Inside was a photo of their family, their parents, Nate and Aiden, smiling against a summer field. You have to live, Nate's voice whispered in his head. But how do you live when betrayal takes those you love? Aiden gripped the locket and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the team set out. Helicopters dropped them at the edge of the gorge, where the air was heavy with dust and tension. Aiden positioned the team. Emma and Trevor covered the flanks. Ryan and Logan prepared explosives to block the convoy's path. Aiden took a spot on a cliff overlooking the gorge, his rifle, like an old friend, at his side. The convoy appeared at midday, the sun blazing mercilessly. 3 armored vehicles and a dozen fighters moved slowly, cautiously. Aiden watched through his scope, his heart steady. But something was wrong. Too quiet. Too predictable. He keyed the radio. Logan, check the western flank. Something's off. Logan replied, All clear. We're ready. But as soon as he spoke, the gorge erupted in chaos. Enemy fighters sprang from behind rocks, heavily armed. This wasn't just a convoy guard, it was an army. Aiden realized they'd been betrayed again. Someone on the base knew their plan and had tipped off the enemy. Ryan's voice crackled through the radio. We're pinned down! Crow, do something! Aiden didn't respond. His eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening on the rifle. He saw Logan and Ryan taking cover behind rocks, Emma dragging a wounded Trevor to safety. The convoy halted, but this was only the beginning. A man in a dark cloak stepped out of one vehicle, holding a tablet. Aiden saw him through the scope. Cold eyes, a smug smile. This wasn't just an enemy. This was someone who knew everything. Aiden took a deep breath. Distance, 1.5 kilometers. Wind, 2 meters per second. His finger rested on the trigger. But this time, he didn't shoot. He remembered Nate, his words. Live, not fight. Killing this man wouldn't stop the betrayal. He had to act differently. Logan, Aiden said into the radio, fall back to the northern pass. I'll distract them. Logan protested, You can't handle this alone. But Aidan had made his choice. He slid down the cliff, rifle at the ready. His movements were swift, precise, like in his younger days. He tossed a smoke grenade, and thick white smoke enveloped the gorge. The enemy scrambled, disoriented. Aidan moved like a shadow among the rocks. He didn't fire, using his knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the enemy. His target was the man in the cloak. If the weapon plans reached the enemy, thousands would die. Aidan reached the convoy's vehicle where the man was issuing orders. With one swift move, he knocked the tablet from his hands and pressed a knife to his throat. "Who's your contact on the base?" he hissed. The man laughed. "You think I'll tell you? You're already dead, Storm." Aidan pressed the knife harder. "Dead or not, I'll find out." At that moment, the gorge shook with an explosion. Logan and Ryan had detonated the road, cutting off the convoy from reinforcements. Aidan used the chaos to grab the tablet and vanish into the smoke. When the team regrouped at the northern pass, Aidan handed the tablet to Trevor. "Pull everything you can," he said. Trevor, despite his injury, nodded and got to work. An hour later, he returned with results. Encrypted messages sent from the base. The traitor was in high command, codenamed Falcon. Aidan returned to the base, tablet in hand as proof. Wilson met him in the office, but this time his gaze was tense. "You're sure it's one of ours?" he asked. Aidan nodded. "Falcon. Find him, or I will." Wilson fell silent, but something in his eyes made Aidan wary. Was the general part of this? That night, Aidan sat in his hangar, holding Nate's locket. He knew the fight was just beginning. Betrayal, like a shadow, was closing in, but he wouldn't give up. Not for glory, but for those who could still live. He didn't come for glory, he came for truth. Are you ready to fight for truth, even if it costs everything? Share if you are. In the forgotten town of Dust Haven, Nevada, where the desert wind howls through rusted gates and the sun bakes the cracked asphalt, a woman named Claire lived in the shadow of obscurity. Dust Haven was a place where dreams went to die, a speck on the map surrounded by endless dunes and abandoned dreams. The locals knew her as the quiet mechanic, the one who could coax life back into a sputtering engine with a flick of her wrench. Her garage, a weathered relic at the edge of town, stood like a sentinel against the encroaching sand. Its corrugated roof groaned under the weight of time, and the neon sign, half-lit, buzzing faintly, read, "Claire's Auto." Nobody asked questions about her. Nobody cared to. Claire was 38, with sharp green eyes that seemed to see through metal and men alike. Her hands, calloused and stained with grease, moved with a precision that spoke of years beyond the wrench. She wore faded jeans and a worn leather jacket, her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid that caught the desert dust. To the townsfolk, she was just another face in Dust Haven, a woman who kept to herself, her voice soft but firm when she spoke. But there was something about her, a stillness, a weight in her gaze, that hinted at a past she'd buried deep. The garage was her sanctuary. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, the hum of a forgotten radio playing old country tunes in the background. Tools hung in perfect order on the walls, each one gleaming as if polished daily. In the corner, behind a tarp, sat an old Lockheed T-33 jet engine, its surface pitted but pristine, a relic that no one in Dust Haven ever questioned. It was her secret, a ghost from a life she'd left behind. Claire had been a test pilot, one of the best, flying experimental aircraft for the Air Force until a tragedy grounded her. A crash, a lost friend, a promise. She never spoke of it. But every night, when the town slept, she'd sit by that engine, her fingers tracing its curves, her mind lost in the skies she'd once ruled. Dust Haven didn't care about her past. To the locals, she was just Claire, the woman who fixed their trucks and kept their lives running. The men at the diner dismissed her with a chuckle, calling her that girl with the wrench. The women admired her grit, but whispered about her solitude. Even the sheriff, a gruff man named Hank, treated her with a mix of pity and indifference. "You're wasting your talents out here, Claire," he'd say, shaking his head. She'd only smile, her lips tight, and turn back to her work. But Claire wasn't hiding. She was waiting. Have you ever felt like the world overlooked you? Share your story in the comments. It was a blistering July morning in 2025 when the quiet of Dusthaven shattered. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a rare desert storm. Claire was in her garage, wrist-deep in the guts of a pickup truck, when the roar of helicopters sliced through the air. The sound was unmistakable, a low, rhythmic thump that vibrated in her chest. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on a rag, and squinted into the distance. 3 black helicopters, sleek and unmarked, were descending on the old military airstrip 5 miles out of town. The airstrip had been abandoned since the Cold War, its hangars crumbling, its runway overtaken by sand. Nobody went there. Nobody had reason to. The townsfolk gathered at the diner, their voices buzzing with speculation. "Government types," Hank muttered, sipping his coffee. "Probably some drill." But Claire's gut told her otherwise. She'd heard that sound before, too many times in places where secrecy was a currency and lives were the cost. She returned to her garage, her jaw tight, and locked the door. Whatever was coming, she wanted no part of it. That night, the storm broke. Rain lashed the desert, turning the streets of Dusthaven into rivers of mud. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the silhouette of the airstrip in the distance. Claire was alone in her garage, the radio now silent, when a sharp knock rattled the door. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for a wrench. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but low. "Open the door, Claire," a man's voice answered, clipped and authoritative. "We need to talk." She cracked the door, peering into the rain. A man in a dark suit stood under an umbrella, his face shadowed, but his posture unmistakably military. Behind him, 2 others waited, their hands near their holsters. "We know who you are, Captain Claire Harper," he said, his voice cutting through the storm. "And we need you." Claire's heart skipped. Nobody in Dusthaven knew her full name, let alone her rank. She hadn't been Captain Harper in over a decade. "You've got the wrong person," she said, starting to close the door. The man's hand shot out, stopping it. "Flight 19, Groom Lake, 2013. You walked away from a crash that killed Colonel Daniel Reese. You were his co-pilot. Don't tell me I've got the wrong person." The name hit her like a punch. Daniel, her mentor, her friend, the man who'd taught her to fly through hell and back. The crash that ended her career, her life in the skies. She'd promised him she'd keep flying, keep fighting, but she'd broken that promise when she walked away. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, rain dripping from his umbrella. "There's a situation at the airstrip, a classified project. It's gone wrong, and you're the only one who can fix it." Claire's eyes narrowed. "I'm a mechanic now. Find someone else." "There is no one else," he said. "And if you don't help, people will die. A lot of people. What would you do if your past came knocking? Tell us in the comments." Claire stood in the rain, her mind racing. The man's words echoed Daniel's last ones. "You're the best I've ever seen, Claire. Don't let them ground you." She'd spent years running from that truth, hiding in Dusthaven where no one could see her wings. But now the past was here, demanding she fly again. "Give me a reason to trust you," she said, her voice hard. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased, showing Claire and Daniel in flight suits, standing in front of an experimental jet. Her younger self was smiling, her eyes bright with purpose. "He believed in you," the man said. "And so do we." Claire took the photo, her fingers trembling. The memory flooded back. Daniel's laughter, his steady hand guiding her through impossible maneuvers, his voice calm even as their jet spiraled toward the desert floor. She'd survived that crash, but he hadn't. She'd carried the guilt ever since, the weight of a promise unkept. "What's the situation?" she asked, her voice steady now. The man glanced at his companions, then back at her. "Project Icarus, a next-gen stealth drone. It's gone rogue, and it's armed. If it leaves the airstrip, it could trigger a catastrophe. We need someone who can outfly it. Someone who knows the old T-33 systems it was built on. Claire's eyes flicked to the tarp in the corner of her garage. The T-33 engine. Her engine. She'd kept it all these years, a reminder of who she'd been. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're the only one who's ever flown against it and lived," he said. "And because you're the only one Daniel Reese trusted." Claire's chest tightened. The storm roared outside, but inside her, a different storm was brewing. She could walk away, let the government clean up its own mess. But she saw Daniel's face, heard his voice. "Don't let them ground you." And she knew she couldn't. "Get me to the airstrip," she said. "Now." The ride to the airstrip was a blur of rain and tension. Claire sat in the back of a black SUV, the man in the suit, Agent Carter he'd called himself, briefing her in clipped tones. Project Icarus was a DARPA experiment, a drone designed to outmaneuver any human pilot. It had been tested in secret at the airstrip, but a glitch in its AI had turned it hostile. It was now circling the facility, its weapons hot, and the team on the ground couldn't shut it down. Worse, the airstrip was surrounded by a no-fly zone, and any attempt to shoot it down risked triggering its failsafe, a payload that could level half the county. Claire listened, her mind already in the cockpit. She hadn't flown in years, but her hands itched for the controls, her senses sharpening with every word. The SUV pulled up to the airstrip's perimeter, where floodlights cut through the rain, illuminating a scene of chaos. Soldiers in tactical gear scrambled, shouting orders. A command tent stood at the edge of the runway, its canvas flapping in the wind. And above, a sleek black shape sliced through the storm, its engines a low, menacing growl. Claire stepped out, the rain soaking her jacket. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone, a scent that pulled her back to a life she'd tried to forget. Carter led her to the tent, where a general, his name tag read Mitchell, stood over a table covered in maps and monitors. He was a bear of a man, his face lined with stress, his eyes cold as he sized her up. "You're the pilot?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "You don't look like much." Claire met his gaze, unflinching. "You don't look like you've got this under control, General." A few soldiers snickered, but Mitchell's face darkened. "This is no place for a civilian," he snapped, "let alone a woman who hasn't flown in a decade." "Then why am I here?" Claire shot back. "You need me, or I wouldn't be standing in this tent. So cut the crap and tell me what I'm flying." Mitchell's jaw tightened, but he gestured to a monitor. It showed a grainy feed of the drone, sleek, angular, its wings cutting through the rain like a predator's claws. "That's Icarus," he said. "It's faster than anything we've got, and its AI is adapting every second. We've got one jet left, an old T-33 trainer retrofitted for combat. It's our only shot." Claire's heart skipped. A T-33. The same jet she'd flown with Daniel. The same jet she'd crashed. She nodded, her voice steady. "Show me the cockpit." Have you ever faced a challenge that felt impossible? Share your moment in the comments. The hangar was a cavern of shadows, the T-33 sitting like a relic of a bygone era. Its silver fuselage gleamed under the floodlights, its lines familiar yet foreign. Claire ran her hand along its side, feeling the cold metal, the faint scars of past flights. The soldiers prepped the jet, their movements hurried, their glances skeptical. She ignored them, climbing into the cockpit with a grace that belied her years away from the skies. The controls were old but familiar, like an extension of her body. She strapped in, the harness tight against her chest, and powered up the systems. The dashboard lit up, dials flickering, the hum of the engine vibrating through her bones. For a moment, she was 28 again, flying with Daniel, the desert stretching endless below. Then Carter's voice crackled through her headset. "You've got one shot, Harper. Bring it down, or we're all done." Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. The runway stretched before her, slick with rain, the storm raging above. The drone was out there, a ghost in the clouds, waiting. She taxied to the runway, the jet's engines roaring, drowning out the doubts of the men below. Lightning flashed, illuminating the desert, and for a moment she saw Daniel's face in her mind, his smile steady and sure. "Ready for takeoff," she said, her voice calm but ironclad. The tower hesitated. Then, "Cleared." Claire pushed the throttle forward, and the T-33 surged, the force pinning her to the seat. The runway blurred, the rain a silver curtain, and then she was airborne, climbing into the heart of the storm. The drone was out there, a predator in the dark, and Claire was no longer the quiet mechanic. She was Captain Harper, the woman who'd once outflown death itself. But Icarus was no ordinary foe. Its AI was learning, adapting, and it knew her moves before she made them. The radar pinged, a red dot circling closer. Claire banked hard, the jet groaning under the strain, her eyes scanning the clouds. Then she saw it, a flash of black against the lightning, a shape too fast, too perfect. The chase was on. The drone dove, and Claire followed, her hands steady on the stick. The T-33 was old, outmatched, but she knew its limits, its strengths. She pushed it harder, the desert blurring below, the storm a chaos of wind and rain. The drone fired, a streak of light that missed her wing by inches. She rolled, her heart pounding, her mind razor-sharp. This wasn't just a machine. It was a test, a mirror of her past, her failures, her promise. Can you feel the tension? What would you do in Claire's seat? Share in the comments. The sky was a battlefield, the storm a living beast. Claire weaved through the clouds, the T-33 screaming as she pushed it to its limits. The drone was relentless, its movements precise, almost alive. It banked left, then right, anticipating her every turn. She could hear Carter's voice in her ear, urgent, warning her of the drone's payload, but she tuned him out. This was her fight, her redemption. She remembered Daniel's lessons. Fly smarter, not faster. Use their strength against them. The drone was faster, but it was predictable in its perfection. Claire baited it, climbing high, then diving low, forcing it to follow. The G-forces pressed her into the seat, her vision tunneling, but she held on. The desert below was a blur of sand and shadow, the storm's lightning casting eerie glows across the dunes. Then she saw her chance. The drone looped, its sensors locked on her, but it was too close to the ground. Claire pulled up, hard, the T-33 straining as she climbed. The drone followed, but its turn was too tight, its AI miscalculating for a split second. She fired, a single missile streaking through the rain. It grazed the drone's wing, sending it into a spin. But Icarus wasn't done. It stabilized, its engines flaring, and turned on her with a vengeance. A warning blared in the cockpit. Missile lock. Claire's heart raced, but her hands were steady. She banked right, then left, the missile trailing her like a hound. The desert rushed up, too close, too fast. She could hear Daniel's voice. "Trust the jet. Trust yourself." She pulled up at the last second, the missile. Slamming into the ground below, a fireball lighting up the night. The drone was still there, circling, its red eye glowing through the storm. Claire's breath was ragged, her hands slick with sweat, but she wasn't done. Not yet. The radio crackled. "Harper, status!" Carter's voice was frantic. "Still here," she said, her voice calm, deadly. "And so is it." The storm raged on, the drone circling closer, and Claire knew this was only the beginning. Icarus was learning, adapting, and it wouldn't make the same mistake twice. She had one chance left, one move to end this. But as she climbed into the clouds, the weight of her past pressed heavier. Daniel's face, his voice, his trust. It was all here, in this moment, in this sky. What happens next? Can Claire outfly the impossible? Share your predictions in the comments. The Nevada sky roared with fury, a cauldron of lightning and rain that swallowed Claire Harper's T-33 jet. The storm was no longer just weather. It was a living beast, clawing at her wings, testing her resolve. Below, the desert stretched endless, its dunes glowing faintly under the flashes of electricity. Above, the rogue drone, Project Icarus, hunted her, its sleek black form cutting through the clouds like a blade. Claire's hands gripped the controls, her pulse steady despite the warning lights flashing across the dashboard. The drone had locked onto her again, its AI adapting faster than she'd expected. This wasn't just a machine. It was a mirror of her own precision, her own past, daring her to be better. Claire's headset crackled with Agent Carter's voice, sharp and urgent. "Harper, you've got 30 seconds before it fires again. Get out of its range." "No," she said, her voice low, resolute. "I'm ending this." She banked hard, the T-33 groaning as the G-forces pressed her into the seat. The drone matched her move, its red sensor eye glowing through the storm. Claire's mind raced, pulling fragments of memory. Daniel Reese's lessons, the crash that haunted her, the promise she'd made. Fly smarter, not faster. The drone was faster, stronger, but it was bound by its programming. Claire wasn't. She was human, flawed, driven by something no AI could replicate. Heart. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to trust yourself completely? Share your story in the comments. Claire dove, the jet screaming as it sliced through the rain. The desert loomed below, a blur of sand and shadow. The drone followed, its engines a low growl that vibrated through the cockpit. She could feel its presence, a predator stalking her through the clouds. The radar pinged, a missile lock. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady, her eyes scanning the horizon. She remembered Daniel's voice. Use their strength against them. She pulled up, hard, the T-33 climbing into the heart of the storm. Lightning cracked, illuminating the drone's angular form as it mirrored her ascent. Claire's plan was risky, but it was her only shot. She leveled out, then rolled left, baiting Icarus into a tight turn. The drone followed, its AI predicting her path, but Claire wasn't playing by its rules. She pushed the jet into a sudden dive, the altimeter spinning as the ground rushed up. The drone hesitated, a fraction of a second, but enough. "Now," she whispered, firing a decoy flare. The missile streaked past, chasing the flare into the desert, exploding in a fireball that lit up the night. The drone corrected, its sensors recalibrating, but Claire was already moving. She banked right, climbing again, her jet shaking under the strain. The T-33 was old, outmatched, but Claire knew its soul. She'd flown it through hell once before. She could do it again. The radio buzzed. "Harper, you're too low," Carter shouted. "Pull up." She ignored him, her focus locked on the drone. It was close now, too close, its silhouette filling her canopy. Claire's mind flashed to the crash. Groom Lake, 2013. The jet spiraling, Daniel's calm voice, the flames. She'd survived, but he hadn't. The guilt had grounded her, but now it fueled her. This was her redemption, her chance to keep the promise she'd broken. The drone fired again, a burst of gunfire that grazed her wing. Sparks flew, the jet shuddering, but Claire held steady. She rolled, diving toward a narrow canyon she'd spotted earlier, its walls jagged and tight. The drone followed, its AI relentless, but the canyon was her territory. She weaved through the rock, the T-33's wings kissing the stone, her breath shallow but controlled. The drone struggled, its precision faltering in the tight space. Claire's lips curved into a grim smile. "Got you!" She burst from the canyon, climbing back into the storm. The drone was still on her tail, but slower now, its sensors confused by the terrain. Claire's eyes flicked to the dashboard, a warning light blinked, fuel running low. She had minutes, maybe less. But then Carter's voice cut through, not with orders, but with something else. "Harper, there's something you need to know. Icarus wasn't a glitch. It was sabotaged." Claire's blood ran cold. "What?" "Someone on the inside," Carter said, his voice tight. "They wanted it to go rogue. General Mitchell. He's covering it up. If you bring that drone down, You're exposing him. Claire's jaw clenched. Mitchell, the man who'd sneered at her, doubted her, dismissed her as a civilian. She'd sensed his disdain, but this was bigger. A conspiracy, a betrayal, lives at stake. Her mind flashed to Daniel, to the crash. Had that been sabotage too? The thought burned, but she pushed it aside. She had a job to do. "Understood," she said, her voice steel. "Get me a clear shot." Carter hesitated. "There's a kill switch, but it's manual. You'd have to get close. Too close." "Then I'll get close," Claire said, and cut the comms.